Welcome to the Conscious Dominance Podcast, where Andrew and Eric, two dominant men in dom-sub relationships, discuss how we approach our dominant roles from a conscious and loving place, and what we learn about ourselves through the deep intimacy that these power exchange dynamics make possible. Sit back and enjoy the show. Eric, welcome back. Good to see you on Conscious Dominance again.
Good to see you, Andrew. Good to be here.
Today I want to talk about this topic of motivation. And as a conscious dominant, our role is to essentially to play the side of the polarity equation that is healthy masculinity. That's strong masculine presence, strong masculine energy. And in order to do that, it's important, I think, that we look at what is it that motivates us? What's the locus inside of us where our motivation comes from? What is it that we are doing or trying to satisfy in us? And the way that I, at least at the beginning of this, I want to break apart and look into more deeply with you is this difference between a motivation of desire versus a motivation of fear. And this is a really powerful one for me because fear is such an intense motivator, right? If you look at political ads, we're kind of in that season right now where you're getting political ads, and some of them focus on desire, on what it is that this candidate wants to accomplish. But lots of them focus on what terrible thing is going to happen if you elect that candidate. So fear can be such a powerful motivating factor for us in trying to avoid the things that we don't want, in trying to not have bad outcomes, in order to try to make things, to try to get away from the stuff that we don't want. And my approach to this is that if we're focusing on the stuff that we don't want, if we're afraid in our motivations, in the way that we are living our lives, in the way that we're leading in relationship, that we're focused on the wrong thing. That really, to be in a strong, healthy place inside of ourselves, we have to be driven by our desire. We have to be looking up at what we want in life and where we want to go. And what is it that we want to achieve and accomplish? What is it that we are trying to do with this whole thing? Why are we even in this role? Are we just trying to, example, are we trying to avoid feelings we don't want to feel from her? And if that's the case, then dominance can come out as control and as limitation and forcefulness. Or are we do we desire the best relationship we can have? And in that case, dominance can come out like guidance and leadership and healthy structure and order. So for me, I always try to focus on where is it that I can lead from desire? What do I want versus what do I not want? Mm-hmm. And for me, the easiest way to identify when I'm in a fear motivation is if I'm looking at a situation and I catch myself inside going, well, I know I don't want that. Instant recognition, if I'm looking at what I don't want, that I'm being motivated by fear. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious what that brings up for you and how that has shown up for you in your life.
Yeah, when you put it, you spoke about it at first and you mentioned desire versus fear. It wasn't obvious to me thinking it necessarily as a motivating tool, that would be the kind of concept that's right behind it. And I think that's a really important, just that realization that when we have fear, if we recognize fear inside of us, we're literally going to be motivated by that fear. And that when we can recognize that whatever energy we're feeling inside of us, the emotions that we're having that are unconscious, those become motivating frequencies. And if they're a negative, we want less of them. So we're trying to avoid them, or we're trying to create a situation where we can have less of it. And what often happens is we end up having more of it because we're so bent on not having the thing that we draw more of the thing. Fear begets fear, it sort of increases it. Whereas if we're in, whether we want to call it desire, or I also think of it, another word that I like with desire is in a awareness that is tilted towards something that's pleasing. Like it's not necessarily like, because when you have desire, it's almost like you're the one driving that, trying to get that thing to you. But what if part of it too for me is just being in a space where you can be aware that you have desire, but ultimately you're not trying to make that thing happen as much as steering towards that thing happening. If that can, it's kind of a nuanced difference, but I think sometimes if we're just so bent on following our desires, that can be often, there's a whole can of worms that's there that we need to kind of address in this conversation. But I think as sort of an operating system that works best, I think, is the awareness, like truly being aware of what's going on inside of us, and that if we're in a space of fear or if we're in a space of a lot of negative emotions, that we're moving those emotions and those negative things to a different place, because then that will motivate us. Whatever, if we're not aware of what's happening inside of us, we're not going to be able to realize that what's inside of us is actually unconsciously motivating us. And so to bring consciousness to a situation is to realize what's inside of us. And if we're feeling a lot of fear, you can't help but not be motivated by that fear. And I think what you're saying is, let's move into a place of desire. And I'm saying, yeah, let's take it even a step further and say, like, bring that out of fear and be in another space. It's almost like if we could look at our emotions like a ladder and get above the line, like I've talked about before, and then start moving from that space.
The place of focus, there's that really old cliched statement that the energy flows where the attention goes.
Right.
And that's kind of what we're getting at here is if our attention is on what we don't want, then our energy is going to go towards that. And even if what you're afraid of isn't all that likely, your focus on it will bring your energy level down. You'll be operating as though that bad thing has already happened before it's even happened. One of the places this plays out a lot, and it used to play out a lot for me, it's been my biggest area of work and growth, is this fear of upsetting Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm in a fear of upsetting her, if I'm in fear of making her mad, if I'm in fear of her getting triggered or shutting down or whatever, now everything I do to approach her is in the frame of my fear. It's about the least fucking dominant energy you can be in.
Right.
To be in an energy of, I'm afraid of upsetting you, so I'm going to try to please you and make you happy so that you're not unhappy with me.
Right.
And that's a really tough energy to approach dominance from, because she won't ever feel you as being dominant. She feels you basically as a service sub for her, or a service top, you might say. If you are in that fear-based energy, you might be very much trying to lead and giving a lot of service, but she's not going to feel you as being dominant.
Truth. It's really, yeah, really important what you're saying. And I feel like I want to just take a little nuance to that. It's like you may have this desire, say even like you have a desire for something to happen. Maybe it's something sexually, maybe it's even going somewhere, or it's something, and maybe it's something that you know might upset her a little bit. If you're not aware, if I'm not aware that when I'm bringing that to her, that I'm concerned that I'm going to upset her and I'm coming at it, I may have the desire that's exciting and meets me, but if I'm not self-aware enough to realize that I'm trying to make sure she's giving me approval for this situation and I'm looking to her as permission for that, then all of a sudden my frequency will go down and I will be in a fear space that I might upset her.
Mm-hmm.
Like she becomes a stand-in for an external authority, for a parent, or for someone like this. And that's why it's so important that I examine and I'm recognizing the frequency inside of me. And as soon as I see something that might be titillating, that it might be exciting to me, and as soon as I drop that frequency and I'm no longer in the desire frequency, I'm more in the fear frequency, she's going to feel the fear. And that's why the courage really is stay in the desire frequency, own it, even if it's upsetting to her. She will feel your courage. She'll feel your desire. She won't feel your fear. And then you are not going to her from a place that's beneath her, that's in a fearful place. And she's going to have a reaction for both of us, our women will have a voice and they may not like what we're bringing to them. And we can then move forward or not, depending on the situation. But at least we're moving forward or not, and everything's out there. We're not hiding anything, or we're not moving from a place that's tepid or fearful. Or another way it plays out is it unconscious manipulation, where you may want something, and in order to get the thing, I am unconsciously manipulating the situation to get the thing that I want. And she can feel that because I'm afraid of her reaction if I come out. And that's covert,
Yep.
right? A covert.
And that's neediness.
And that, exactly, it becomes out neediness.
And that is, again, the very last thing that we are ever looking to show up as dominance is needy. And that's another interesting little distinction to draw here is desire, yes, but that desire has to be overt, right?
Mm-hmm.
The opposite of covert. We have to be willing to speak up for what it is that we want and why. This is why desire, I think, has to be motivated by truth. It has to be motivated by something beyond us. We have to be connected to something beyond us, so our desires are not just trying to meet and fill some hole inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to be connected to a deeper truth to know that our desire and what it is that I want for Dawn is right for her, not just what I want. Because desire doesn't, when I say desire, I don't just mean whatever I want. Sometimes I do, but that's not the point, is just me always getting my way. It's about me having a desire for what's right.
Correct. And that may be or may not be something that's short-term satisfying, but that we have a long-term vision of the whole situation and that our desire is really what's best for the long-term vitality and health of the situation. And that may include short-term titillation that may require us to upset her because we feel like, oh, she may not like that. And we're kind of stretching her in a different situation. But it's far worse to be covert about it or to hide it or to take that desire somewhere else and hide it from her and come to her in a false kind of way. And I feel like this is one of those things that I feel for me has been a big growing curve for myself, especially around other women, around sexuality, things like this. It's just owning wherever I am in that situation, owning my attraction, owning my desires, and not letting them rule me either, holding them lightly. I'm not addicted to that. And I'm not someone who has to go and have them meet or satiated. But if they're in me and I don't own them and I'm not able to navigate them with alacrity, then she's going to feel that and she's going to feel that I'm hiding something. And navigating that whole world has been one where she's called me out and she's said, hey, I see you feeling things and desiring things that you're not owning. I'm and how to navigate that within a dominant submissive status is an interesting dynamic. And it's almost paradoxical because it feels like you're betraying something, but you have to risk the betrayal to get to the other side of a healthy, honest relationship with my desires. And that those are here to be met. I'm doing the whole point of my life with her is that it's inclusive of her desires and my desires. And what is the way to achieve the healthiest way for us to manifest those desires and to meet our needs in our life, and that our desires are truly inclusive of things that are far beyond and far bigger than anything just on a sexual plane, but it's much more energetic. It's much more of a dynamic that's here in service of something to a greater whole and to others. And so navigating, it's almost like an ecosystem of life and vitality that you have to sort of play. And if you let the desires become too much a central focus, that's what addiction is. And I feel like that's when things become problematic. And if you hide things, you can't actually improve the thing. Something that I've spoken about before. I have to own the thing to have a healthier relationship with the thing. You can't improve a relationship that I don't own, that I have the relationship. Whether I want to continue to have it, or if I want to have it in a healthier way, or it's more deviant and I want to bring it in a more healthy way, I have to own that and be honest about it with myself and then with her. And that's requires courage.
First of all, conscious dominance vocabulary time. I love the word alacrity. Thank you for that. Great word. Well done. I'm with you on the ownership of desire, because that's so damn challenging, especially if we've been in a place where we've been afraid to upset our woman, to really own our desires. And that's the hardest, by the way, when we still hold shame around our desire. Because if there's shame around that desire, it can be there, but we can think it's bad. And if we're judging our own desires, if we're judging our own wants, even if they are maybe a little on the deviant side, maybe they are a little bit on the dark side, wishing them away doesn't make them go away. It just makes them come out. It makes that energy come out sideways when we're suppressing that energy. But if there are these desires that we have and we aren't able or willing to speak up for them, and we aren't able to accept them in ourselves first, but then speak up for them from a place of worthiness, then we're just carrying around this suppressed version of ourselves. And not only are we having to live in that suppression, but she's only getting to relate to the suppressed version of me. It's so damn hard, though, to bring acceptance to something that you've already judged as bad about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we have to sit in the discomfort of accepting something we don't like and giving it the space inside of ourselves to be seen and welcomed as a part of us, even if it's something that eventually needs to go away.
Mm-hmm.
If it's something that there's not space for in the relationship, for example, ignoring it or not owning it, to your point, doesn't make it go away. It just, it's going to end up building resentment, or it's going to come out sideways, or we're going to do something stupid because we have all that energy inside of us. I think this is where a lot of infidelity comes from. I think it's where a lot of secretive hidden porn use comes from. A lot of this stuff comes from suppressed desires that can't be or won't be accepted and then spoken up for.
Right. And I think a lot of this, for me, the conscious dominance, one of the primary ethics that I live by with Rachel is transparency. It's an integrity. And that is, well, first of all, she's psychic. And so when we're, anyway, she can read right through. But even beside that, the health, the healing that takes place from bringing something that's shameful out into the light and being received, though challenging maybe at first, but then being able to transmute, that is true alchemy. And what I find is that shame and fear are pretty much the same thing. Like shame is just another word for fear. And so when we have shame, we have fear. And when I bring shame out into the light, what I'm doing is I'm doing something that's courageous. I'm doing something that's vulnerable. I think so much, Brene Brown, when she talks about how there's no way to get to courage without going through vulnerability. Like pretty much when we say something's courageous, we're saying it's vulnerable, just a different variation on the same word. So coming out and bringing out your shame, we call it vulnerable or call it courageous. And I know for me, when I do things that are courageous, I feel better. I feel more erect. I feel more in my masculine, in my integrity, in my dominance, in my conscious dominance. And so, a go to way for me to even kind of have a jolt is to own what I may have shame around and bring that to her and own it. And that has been something that's not easy to do. It's probably one of the more challenging things to do. And things maybe from my past or my present, and to not skirt that and sit with that and sit with those desires. And the desire does not equate, I have to have it, I
Mhm.
have to make it happen. There's an energy of desire that is a beautiful thing to just be in. When you're looking forward to something, or when you can just feel a sexual tension with someone. It doesn't mean you need to go and have sex with that person. There's a just cool to be in that energy. Or when there's a desire and you see something that's like when I see a beautiful painting or I see a beautiful scene in nature, I don't need to own that nature. I don't need to own that painting. I can just be in that space, and that might include desire. And I think Rachel's done an incredible job with me of just allowing myself to be in a space of desire, and that a frequency of desire can be our day. And that's really truly what a conscious dom, like that's what I do. Like that's what I do is to bring an energy of desire. So she's desiring me so that I can be a no to that, which makes her have more of a desire, and that I can have a desire, but I enjoy being uh, keeping her in her place, and I enjoy her desiring more. And in order to do that, it requires me to own and be transparent about my entire field, so she can trust me in my integrity.
Desire is so magnetic,
Right.
and it's magnetic. I think it's charisma when a man is filled
Mhm.
with desire, but he has control of it.
Oh yeah.
And I really think it's magnetic when a woman is full of desire and is maybe even a little bit out of control of it.
Well, that's why you need to be her. You. That's why I feel like the relationship has a dominant and a
Hmm.
submissive, and she's loyal to you, and that's why the dynamic works, because you want her to feel in control, but you want her loyalty and her intent, her fidelity is to you. And so, and then as soon as you allow it, then boom, it's on. Where she, with me, she's not the one keeping me in check. I'm keeping me in
Hmm.
check.
Yeah.
And
Like you can't
she can
contain
trust that.
her. You can't be her containment if you can't first be your own containment.
Exactly. But you got to feel, but she wants to feel that you have desire, that you're lit up, that you're, but you have your sword sheathed.
Yep.
It's that idea of blessed are the meek. I remember Jordan Peterson talking about that with the Beatitudes, and it was a different translation. He said, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Mistranslation is blessed are those that can, use their sword, but keeps it in check.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing with desire. It's blessed are those who have their desire, but knows when to wield it and not wield it.
You mentioned fear being and shame being kind of the same thing. Another thing that I think is very similar is the energy of fear and anxiety. And so many people go through life now thinking that they have an anxiety disorder. And really, to me, anxiety is just owning, like creating an identity out of something that you're afraid of. And then it's an attachment to that fear. It's taking fear and then adding another layer of resistance to it. So now you're identified with your reaction to the fear. And I don't remember who said it, but I remember hearing someone say, anxiety doesn't exist. Fear exists. What are you afraid of? And how can you start to confront that fear and face that fear so you can overcome that fear? You don't overcome anxiety by stopping anxiousness. You overcome anxiety by facing the fear. And for a lot of men who are anxious around women, who might be watching this, listening to this, thinking that they wish they could be a dom, they wish they could have a sub, but think like they're too anxious or afraid to do that. How you start doing that is flipping that on its head and start looking at what is it that you desire? What do you want? And why do you want it? And how is it a good thing if you get your way? How is it helpful and beneficial to someone else to follow you?
That's true. And I think the whole point, in a way, is that you start meeting your desires. I mean, you want something, you go for it. And the whole point of this relationship is that your desire is not something to be afraid of. And I feel like another thing that when you were talking about anxiety, I was thinking about how in my past, in my previous life, I had panic attacks and I had a lot of anxiety and I did a lot of things to numb the anxiety. I didn't even know I had anxiety. And I ended up in the hospital from a panic attack that was so severe. I was in the emergency room.
Wow.
And they pretty much were like, you just need to breathe, buddy. Like, you're just afraid. There's nothing wrong with you. And unless you've gone through that or done that, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but you feel like you're going to die. And it's a pretty crazy thing. But my way out of it was actually by getting rid of all the things that were numbing me, all the things that were actually keeping the anxiety at bay, but were also keeping me from feeling the things I actually needed to start feeling and I needed to start addressing in my life. And so what I had to do was I had to go and expose myself to the very thing that I was afraid of or that I was feeling insecure about. And I love that phrase, exposure therapy. And it doesn't mean you just run headlong into it. It's all about dosage. So I may be afraid of the ocean. For example, recently I got this injury at a big wave. I'm not going to go next time and just go right back at the bigger wave. I'm going to just do a little one and then a little more. And the same thing if you're afraid of talking to a girl, or if you're afraid of bringing up a desire to your woman, start with a small thing and then bring it bigger. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but when I was riddled with anxiety, that wasn't obvious because you're so afraid. Just even a little bit feels ominous. But the worst thing is just to stay where you're at. Otherwise, if you do that, you're just in anxiousness and in fear. And over time, your whole nervous system just gets jacked to a point where the panic attacks become a result. And I needed substances and other things to keep myself just able to exist.
I think you're living in avoidance of the things that you need to face. And
Mhm.
when you're living in avoidance, and the harder you try to avoid something, and the more that you've convinced yourself that you're afraid of it and that bad things are going to happen, and you start looking for more evidence of that fear, and you start seeing it because you're looking for it, and you start
Mhm.
expecting it. There's a great
Mhm.
book called The Expectation Effect that talks about how
Mhm.
we can literally change our realities by changing what we expect out of reality.
Mhm.
But the more that we're focused on what we don't want, bringing this back around, the more that we're focused on fear, the more that we're paying attention to avoidance and trying to get away from the things we don't want or numbing ourselves to it. I think that's where panic attacks and anxiety attacks and these kinds of things can really kick in, because if we've tried so damn hard to avoid something and then we're faced with it and we can't get away from it, we're going to freak the fuck out.
Yep. And what's so interesting is the more that I've done this, the less and less I'm afraid of anything. Like, I just don't have fear much anymore. I go out into the world and in situations that used to be kind of scary, and I'm not scared. There's very few things that really frighten me. Uh, and that's been through really looking at the parts of me that were afraid, excuse me, that were afraid, that seemed like were inside of me. The things that we're most afraid of, we're afraid that the world might see that we're insecure or that we're inadequate or that we are worthless. What's our core wound that's underneath everything? That's the thing that's the scariest thing for people to witness. And the more that I've allowed people to see the parts of me that I'm the most afraid to let them see, and then I show up again and I do a little better and a little better and a little better and a little better, you're not afraid anymore.
Feels like
You're
you could
just
do anything
exactly.
because you can, and you start to build that belief in yourself and that trust in yourself.
It's true.
I think about this in terms of the concept of masculine frame. The For anybody who maybe doesn't understand this concept of frame, any social interaction is always being led by someone, and that someone is who has the strongest belief in themselves and in the reality in which they're living. Everyone else will conform to the reality of the person who is has the strongest sense of self and belief in themselves. And if we're focused on fear, and if we're living in fear, and we're living in avoidance, and we are afraid, we have a very weak frame. We're going to be very easily drawn into, for example, the frame of a woman that we're with, giving her what she wants, because if she knows what she wants, then we can please her. Well, we've also then put her in the leadership position in that connection, because now she's telling us what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're with a woman who wants to be submissive, she doesn't want to be the one in charge of telling you what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be able to hold the frame of an interaction, which means that we have to build that sense of strength and that sense of self-confidence so that she can settle inside of your frame.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about this in our relationship like the walled garden, where my whole existence is like a big walled garden for Dawn to play in.
Mm-hmm.
And my goal is, and my objective in my life is to be the best that I can be, to improve myself in every area in that I can possibly improve myself, to be the best that I can be, so that she can be held within my consciousness. She can be held within my leadership, within my structure. And that can be so big and so expansive that she can play in it and never run out of space to be all of who she wants to be. But she can always still be protected by me, held by me, led by me, provided for by me. And this happens sometimes where she goes through a period of growth where she blows a hole in one of those walls, and all of a sudden she's out here like, I'm freaking out, I'm uncontained. And that's a call for me to not to like drag her back, Then I'm
Right.
like the crab in a bucket. You know, the crabs try to climb out of the bucket, the other crab pulls it back down in. But that's a call for me to grow and expand myself to be able to hold this new part of her.
So true. That's so true. And I think a lot of it, how I feel is this is why I can't be a control. If I'm thinking that I'm controlling her or I'm telling her what to do, the conscious dominance is not telling her what to do. It's not controlling her. It's much more like the strength card in tarot. Something that I'm interested is the tarot. And when you see that strength card, it's a woman with a lion, and she's able to be and hold this powerful lion and tame that lion, but it's not to suppress the lion. Again, it goes back to like the horse whisperer. It goes back to this idea that you can become at one with her. You join her energy in a way, and then you lead it. And the container is expansive, and the container becomes something that's in the frame. You have to be alive to the frame, and it may need to get bigger. And if you have a woman like my Rachel, she expands and expands, and so if I'm thinking that I'm going to slash that off, it reminds me of this myth called the bed of Procrustes. And the bed of Procrustes was a Procrustes had a bed, and when you got into the bed, he would chop off your feet to fit into the bed. And a lot of dudes, they chop off the feet of their women to fit into the bed of their frame. And the key is that your woman's going to get bigger, have more desire, have more lust, have more wants, make more money, want more things. Can you keep that frame where you still are keeping that frame? I have to be in harmony with something that's beyond myself. It can't be about my little petty desires. My desire is truly to be in service with like a greater harmony. Call it God or oneness or something. But I want to be lined up with that and be a conduit of that. That's the ultimate desire. Because then as I do that, it expands to be able to hold her. And then my work and my desire is that can I alchemize immediately to be able to take the hard times, the challenging things, and transmute that energy into something that is gold, that is really, truly healing, and that can hold her where she can feel me not being afraid or not wilting or not collapsing or it's too much. Can I stay there and just let it be? And not necessarily am I going to go by her whims. I'm not going to do all the things she wants. I'm not going to be led by that. And it's a kind of a nuance. Am I allowing the space for her to be in this while at the same time maintaining my frame? It's a paradox
Yeah.
because you're allowing her to be in that, not controlling it. But I think another way of thinking about it is I think of it as like being the authority, being the author of it.
You hit on a really important point, I think, here, that the desires that we hold, like I said earlier too, they have to be in alignment with truth. They have to be in connection to something beyond us so that we can lead her in a way that isn't just based in whims. But at the same time, those smaller desires, those things that feel like whims, they can hold the seeds of truth.
Yep.
And that's where bringing acceptance to them is important. We can't just pretend like our desires don't matter. But it brings up another topic here that I think is an important piece of this whole conversation is, in some ways, it's kind of the optimist versus the pessimist approach, right? If we are holding a pessimistic energy, if we're holding a negative energy, if we're looking down versus looking up, we're going to bring an entirely different kind of strength to the relationship if we can be looking up. If we can be in a space of what I call admiration versus pity. And the way that I talk about this, I think people relate to each other in one of two ways, either admiration or pity. They're either relating to each other based on what they admire or appreciate about each other, or they're relating to each other based on how they feel bad for each other.
Mm.
And when you start looking at relationships in this way, you'll see that a lot of the fundamental incompatibilities that some people have is when one person is relating to the other in admiration, in looking up to them, or in encouraging them, or wanting the best for them, or seeing and saying what they appreciate, gratitude, these higher consciousness sorts of energies. And other people then are looking to be felt sorry for. They want to be pitied. They want you to feel bad for them, and they want to commiserate.
Mm-hmm.
And there's such a fundamental difference in those two ways of seeing the world, that we have to recognize that if we want to grow with someone, if we want to grow in relationship, in consciousness, in awareness, in presence, in desire, in all of these things, we have to get both of us on the same page, that we are living in desire. We're living in a higher consciousness. We're living in gratitude and admiration and appreciation, that we're not in an energy of commiseration and fear and feeling sorry for each other and looking for pity.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. Pity leads to contempt. And I think contempt is one of the worst things in a relationship. So the Gottmans have talked about the four horsemen in a relationship that are the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And I forget what the four of them were, but I know one of them's contempt, and it's the worst. And when you were talking about that pity, I think contempt gets into that. And stonewalling's another one. And forget the other two right now. But
apathy's got to be in there.
Yeah, it's like that. So, but I know contempt is in there. And when you were talking about that pity, and this is where, as a guy, I think, I have been around a woman who's exhibiting a lot more characteristics that are of a masculine sort. And then I compare myself to her. It's easy to get into a place where you feel sorry for yourself, or you feel lower, or you had some previous success and you're not there. And you just get stuck in a hierarchical thinking. I've been there. I've gone through this. Sooner or later, she's going to look at you with pity, with sadness, and it starts to get into a contempt. This is where growth mindset has to be foundational and fundamental. But growth is not necessarily always linear. For me, I've witnessed that sometimes I must take a step backwards. I might need to go to a new career. I may need to go to learn a skill. There's something where you might have to go down in the totem to go back up. Having the courage to do that, working on myself, working on my emotions, a woman will see that and she will respect that. And a key way for that to always be able to meet my woman is that if I am doing the work on my inner work, that's the psychological and the emotional terrain, and I'm able to not get triggered and all the things we've talked about before, and I'm able to own my desires, and I'm able to navigate with alacrity, she can feel that, so that no matter what I'm going through, I'm not bringing all that to her. I have found that it's a very lonely process. I think one of the things that I didn't realize, I'm so grateful for you, Andrew. We've talked about this before, but it's very lonely to be in a relationship, in a conscious dominance relationship, because I cannot go to her anymore in my absolute pain. I just can't. I can't consistently go to her when I'm in my shitstorm and maintain any amount of that. I have to go and take that to myself. I have to learn how to hold myself. Lately, my greatest comforting and therapy is nature. I literally go out into the woods. I sit with the rock. I sit with it. I cry. I feel. I move through things. I feel the earth. holding me and comforting me. And there's great power when I start to have a relationship with the earth. I really start to feel like the mother energy. I start to feel this comforting, nurturing nature energy. And once you can vibe on that, you don't need your woman to provide that for you. That's the true power. That's the true dominance. The desire then is then I want to be of service to her. I don't want her to satiate and be need. I don't come to her needy. I come with an overflow to her because I'm able to comfort myself on my own and find ways to do that and take care of myself.
Yeah. And then, for me, that's being able to be in an inner strength and
Correct.
being able to be solid enough that I can be connected to that deeper truth. I can be connected to that bigger picture of where it is that I want to lead her
Correct.
and why. This is why I tell Dom sub couples all the time, you have to have values for your relationship. You have to know what they are. You have to write them down. You have to have a vision for what it is that you're doing. What's the purpose of this whole thing? If you don't have a purpose, you're going to lose any sort of directionality. And that falls on the dominant. We have to be the initiator and the one creating the direction. So we need a vision. We need to have a code of conduct. We need to have rules. We need to have rituals. We need to apply structure to this relationship, because then when we have that structure and we know what it is that we're doing, that we're trying to create, and we can be and stay in a place of strength, then we can stay connected to what it is that we're doing. Why are we doing all of this? What's the whole point of taking all of this damn responsibility, of going through all of this inner turmoil and sorting ourselves out and grounding ourselves and coming into a place of higher consciousness? It's so that we can lead her and be strong enough to hold ourselves together and her together when she inevitably gets triggered as fuck, because it is triggering to be out of control. That's why we get triggered. We feel out of control. It's why we get emotional, because we feel out of control. So submission is inherently going to be upsetting. It's going to be emotional. It's going to be triggering. It's going to challenge every single part of her.
It's true. And I think that's really well said. And I think one thing that Rachel's really helped me to see is how much desire and trigger and all the emotionality that's in that flux is a feminine energy and if I'm uncomfortable with it in myself, then I'm uncomfortable with it in her. The degree to which I can find comfort and I can be comforting to myself and I can hold myself is the degree that I can hold her. And so if I can't handle my emotional fluctuation, I can't handle my own desires, I can't handle my own triggers, how am I going to handle hers? So I have to go and handle that. And the way to handle it isn't to suppress it, isn't to not feel it, isn't to lack the desires. Literally the opposite. Let's turn that dial up, see what I can do with that immensity of that passion and that ribald nature. And there's another word.
Great word. You got the vocabulary on fire today. I like it.
So it's a full moon today, right? So when there's that fullness of feeling, and we can hold it and still maintain composure, still maintain dignity and erection and erect, she trusts that. And then she can bring her flux and that flux of influx of that. And you can hold that's a secret sauce. There becomes this ravenousness that it's just juicy. It's literally and figuratively, and it's a beautiful energy to be around. And it's just a byproduct. It's not necessarily something that I have to go and make happen. It is the result of me being in this full state.
What you're getting at here is really the two fundamental necessities if we want to hold this energy of dominance, with one of them being capability. We have to be capable in our emotional intelligence, in our physical life, in our ability to handle whatever goes on in our lives. Whatever happens, whatever problems come up, whatever emotions come up, whatever sexually happens, we have to be in a place of capability to be to really be able to wrangle that no matter what it is. And then two, we have to be non-reactive. That doesn't mean, I guess it can kind of seem stoic, but not stoic in a cold way, non-reactive in a warm way, just where we aren't being upset by her. I've called this before being untriggerable, but a different way of saying that is just non-reactive. And these two things go together, because being capable is how we can be non-reactive, because we don't.
And non-reactive, another way of saying is keeping that sword sheathed. It's the capacity to have the desire, to have all the feelings, but not react. I mean, I think what I found too is really interesting is that when we're feeling really sad or really scared, it's actually literally very similar to feeling really turned on and really excited and really aroused. And both of those energies, if we aren't able to navigate them with alacrity, with a sense of dominion, then they rule us. And so you have to find that sort of middle way, which doesn't mean staying out of these places. It means like bringing that all together. And then there becomes this power force and this energy. And that's the true artist. That's the true craft of consciousness. This is what it is to be an artist of this energy. And then you walk in the spaciousness, it actually enlivens and it turns on people around you. You want to be a walking turn on. So people in your presence are more aroused. That's not through being repressed. It's the opposite. But that turn on, you're in control. They feel safe. You're not going to wittingly do anything about it.
Yeah. And I think that you've made this point before about how, like, the greatest fear is being seen as incompetent, to have your incompetence kind of put on display, right? To have other people see and know that you don't know what you're doing, or that you can't handle this situation.
Or your woman seeing that.
Yeah, especially that. And the only way that we ever get to competence is by recognizing our incompetence. You talked about that on a recent episode too. We have to be able to recognize our incompetence, and then to do the mind-numbingly, painstakingly, just brutal work that it takes to go from being a novice to building at least a level of competence, to maybe even gaining some mastery over a skill, whether that skill be how we handle emotions, or that skill be how we make money, or that skill be, whatever it is. We can just continually improve ourselves. And the places that we find ourselves feeling incompetent are our greatest areas of growth. They're the places that we can focus that growth mindset and say, I don't know anything about this. I had a guy that I coach recently tell me that he felt like he wasn't good at man stuff because he didn't know how to do things like sharpen the blades on his lawnmower and replace a fuel filter and some of these things. So he had kind of judged himself as not being good at man stuff, and therefore he thought he was going to be less attractive to his wife. And I said, well, you can't lump man stuff together. What you need to do is recognize, I need to do a fuel filter and I don't know how. Admit that first, and then you go figure out how to replace a fuel filter. Maybe you ask Joe down the street who knows how to do it. You say, Joe, can you teach me how to do this? Or maybe you ask Google, or you ask YouTube, or you just try to figure it out and fuck it up and then fix it and learn by fixing, whatever. You gain competence by being willing to make mistakes.
100%. I mean, this is the story of my life. It is being a fool. It is admitting that you're a fool, admitting that you don't know. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do this. I think that this is where respecting the craft and what you just said, and you've coached, you've helped me, you've coached me. I mean, we originally met because I hired you.
Right.
And I was like somebody who identified as a dominant male, somebody who identified with these things. And yet in my relationship, with a very submissive woman, there were some things that were not lining up. But I had to admit that as much as I thought myself was all these things, how was I actually turning out? How was I coming in? What was my energy that I was bringing to the situation? Was I able to listen to her when she had was giving feedback without folding? I mean, there was so much where the vision that I thought of myself and the reality were very, very far apart. And I think for any guys that are out there, I'm with you. I have been someone who has not been good at man stuff. And you had the greatest advice. Just pick one thing, do that. Pick another thing, do that. And I think it reminds me of this book by Anne Lamott. It's called Bird by Bird. And she's talking about writing. And it's a great book about being a writer. And this her dad was helping her brother write a paper that was long overdue, and he's overwhelmed, and it was on ornithology and all these birds, and he's like, what do I do? And he's like, bird by bird. And I always think about that, bird by bird. It's just like, take one task, do that. There's got to be this guy's got to be good at something, so go and get good at something else, one thing, and then you go and you do the next thing. It's one thing, and then do the next thing. And I think about that so much with Rachel. It's like, is there one part of my life that I can show more skill in? Can I bring a craft to that? And then is there another thing? And then another thing? And then another thing? And then pretty soon you look back and you're like, oh shit, like I've got some range here.
And then you have less to be afraid of.
Correct. But
Because,
you got to be willing to show up when you don't know it. And that's exactly what you were just saying. And that is the thing that, man, we're so afraid to look incompetent. But that's literally the courage. It's far better to show up and be like, I don't know. I don't know how to do this, than to go in guns blazing and think you know so much. You know, it's interesting when I used to do construction and I didn't know how to do stuff. And I would come to and admit that I didn't know. And I remember the guys working with me were always shocked. They're like, wow, nobody does that. Like, it's something that like people just come in and they pretend to know stuff. And then I would go home and I would look it up on YouTube and I would practice and I would figure out how to do it and I would learn. And then I'd come back and I'd ask questions. And within a couple of years, I was actually having my own company and doing my own thing. But it came from humility. It came from a place where I admitted that I didn't know. And it was interesting is that the guys that I would hire that came in thinking they knew so much were always the guys that knew the least and were so in their performance of sort of this masculine bravado and I know it. And those are the guys that are, it's dangerous. It's literally dangerous to have them around you because you can't trust that what they're doing and it's not helpful. And I find that that false ego is actually one of the most dangerous things. And women can smell that. They feel that from you.
yeah, well, it's unsafe to them. And that's what
Exactly.
that is what a woman is biologically and evolutionarily programmed to do, is to sniff out that false sense of strength in men and to poke it and to try to take it down, because if they're going to be around that man is not going to be able to keep her safe, because he's going to be so focused on making sure that he's not wrong, to making
Yes.
sure that he's able to hold up that ego.
Correct.
And I think it's a great place to kind of wrap this up, is what that shows about you is the willingness to go into all of these different situations. It's one of the things coming back to this admiration versus pity, one of the things I admire about you is your ability to continually challenge yourself and the desire to be better, the desire to grow, the desire to expand and to learn what you don't know, and then to put that into practice and then build on it. It's such an admirable trait in a human being. And it's one of the things that I love about you, brother. So,
Well, I thank you, Andrew. I appreciate hearing that. And I see your example of showing up to a craft continually with excellence. That's something that I am desiring more of in my life. And so I just being with you is helps me to move forward towards more and more of an excellence and more where I am wanting to put myself out there more and more. So thank you for that. And thank you for having me. And thank you for all of you that are listening for showing up. Love the comments, love the emails, love the feedback. So appreciate everyone who's out there. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll echo all of that. The comments we get from people on this podcast are just beautiful and heartwarming, and they mean a lot to us. So thank you to everyone who listens. And thank you, Eric. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.